Well, Mr. Speaker, I will not begin my remarks, but if... Absolutely, Mr. Speaker, but with your leave, if I may. Prior to the introduction of my remarks, I certainly want to thank the dedicated public officers in the Ministry of Finance, led by the Acting Financial Secretary, Ms. Cheryl Ann Lister, the Budget Director, Ms. Tina Tucker, the MP Jashay Adams, and Junior Minister of Finance, Senator Ariana Hodgson, and all the teams that have worked tirelessly over the past month to put together budgets. Ministers, permanent secretaries, controllers in various ministries, and we are pleased today that we are able to present it, complete with books and everything, on time.
Thank you.
And I will begin whenever you tell me I'm ready.
Well, there's been a lot of long nights, a lot of candle oil went long to produce what's here today. And as I said earlier, the country is participating, and we look forward to hearing it ourselves this morning. Sorry, if you can get a couple up to the opposition leader and we can talk to get early, we can get some of this done. Here.
All right, there you are, Cole. You got yours.
Sorry.
Not as long as yours, Cole, but I got a lot to say, so. Shall I, Mr. Speaker?
Looks like Madam President? Start. Madam President. Mr. Premier?
All right, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Bermuda stands at more than the dawn of a new fiscal year. No society has been immune to the socio-economic impacts of the pandemic, foreign wars, inflation, and disruptions in supply chains. These are the realities of life today, and culturally, though we may have shed ourselves of our masks, the freedom of that change and the return to normality that it should have represented has been short-lived. Our growth aspirations and the promise of renewal have been somewhat frustrated by these lingering trials. But even in the midst of such unprecedented challenges, Bermuda, the jewel of the Atlantic, has demonstrated a determination to defy the odds. Mr. Speaker, amongst the very real hardships that our people are experiencing, there is cause for hope. This budget will use the mechanism of public financing to harness that hope by investing in people, advancing critical infrastructure projects, and continuing the work of change demanded of this government by our successive historic election victories. Mr. Speaker, the Bermuda Progressive Labor Party government has always been about the politics of hope. It is a mantra set out by the first PLP Premier, Dame Jennifer Smith, and has been the guide for all those who would offer themselves for public service under our banner. In a 1997 speech to the then International Companies Division of the Bermuda Chamber of Commerce, Dame Jennifer said this, and I quote, "A progressive Labor Party government will create a Bermuda in which the government will not only serve the people, but we will rekindle hope, heal its present divisions, and replace apathy and alienation with vigor and a feeling of oneness and unity. We will work steadfastly to create a Bermuda in which one can grow up healthy, enjoy old age, and live to see children and children's children do better than they did. We will work for justice in the workplace. We will work for a more peaceful and peaceable community so we can once again feel safe on our streets and in our homes." End quote. Mr. Speaker, that call to action, that vision applies equally today as it did 26 years ago when Dame Jennifer said it. This 2023-24 budget addressed the complexities of the 21st century's change demands while staying true to the core ideals that the people of Bermuda have endorsed in 5 of the 6 past general elections. Mr. Speaker, the year 2022 was one of many challenges. Geopolitical conflict, inflation, a food supply crisis, supply chain bottlenecks, and the lingering effects of the COVID-19 pandemic have caused shockwaves across the global community. Mr. Speaker, the International Monetary Fund estimates that the global economy will grow by 3.4% in 2022, slow to 2.9% in 2023, and then rise to 3.1% in 2024. Growth in advanced economies is expected to decline sharply from 2.7% in 2022 to 1.2% in 2023, before rising to 1.4% in 2024. The United States growth is projected to fall from 2% last year to 1.4% this year and 1% in 2024. On the other hand, growth in emerging markets and developing economies is projected to rise modestly from 3.9% in 2022 to 4% in 2023 and 4.2% in 2024. Global inflation is expected to fall from 8.8% in 2022 to 6.6% in 2023 and 4.3% in 2024. Mr. Speaker, in addition to projections of slowing economic growth and lower inflation for 2023, it is generally expected that there will be higher global interest rates and tightened monetary conditions. Favorable scenarios include a boost in spending from pent-up demand and faster disinflation. Overall, inflation is expected to continue on a downward trend as international fuel and non-fuel commodity prices decline due to weaker global demand. The tightening of monetary policy is expected to continue putting downward pressure on core inflation. And easing in advanced economies' labor markets is expected to moderate wage inflation. As consumer preferences revert to services, price of goods are expected to fall. Mr. Speaker, the pandemic has created an environment of higher debt levels, lower growth, and higher borrowing costs, placing many emerging and developing economies at high risk of debt distress. This exacerbates the vulnerability of these economies as global interest rates continue to increase. Further, an escalation of geopolitical tensions could lead to disruptions in the global supply chain, resulting in upward pressures on the price of goods, such as energy and food, and the possibility of tighter monetary conditions. Navigating 2023 requires the prioritization of actions to reduce inflation, contain the reemergence of COVID-19, ensure financial stability, restore debt sustainability, address supply chain constraints, and strengthen multilateral communication. Mr. Speaker, I will now focus on the domestic economy. Bermuda's gross domestic product, the primary indicator for economic growth, is estimated to have grown between 3.4% to 3.9% in 2022. In 2022, Bermuda saw signs of economic growth, supported by a rebound in quarterly GDP in the first half of the year. Positive economic performance was fueled by new international business registrations, visitor spending, higher employment income, greater levels of household consumption, and increased construction activity, indicating a continued trajectory of economic recovery. And Mr. Speaker, I know there's been some commentary about second quarter GDP growth. The revisions that will be issued by the Department of Statistics shortly, and the second quarter GDP growth, the economy, in fact, did grow. And that is the reason why I'm stating that in the Honorable House today. Mr. Speaker, Bermuda continues to see growth in international business. In 2022, 812 new company incorporations and a 5.2% increase in jobs in international business, with 230 new jobs being filled. I'm happy to report that for the second consecutive year, the majority of new posts in international business were filled by Bermudians rather than guest workers, proving that the balanced policies of the Progressive Labor Party government create the catalyst for growth in international business and ensure Bermudians benefit from that growth. This sector now provides 4,642 jobs within our economy and is the single largest economic activity group. Mr. Speaker, with the continued easing of border restrictions, the travel industry globally showed signs of a rebound in 2022. And Bermuda's tourism sector reflected that, as demonstrated by a significant improvement in air visitor and cruise visitor spending. There was an increase of employment levels by 6.3%, bringing the total number of jobs in the accommodation and food services sector back to 3,629. Mr. Speaker, in 2022, there was a decline in both building permits and planning applications. However, during the first 3 quarters, the value of new projects started grew from $83.4 million in 2021 to $100.6 million in 2022, an increase of 20.6%. This figure for the first 3 quarters of 2022 surpasses the last 3 years' annual totals and is above pre-pandemic levels of 2019. This signifies a strong recovery in the sector, which also saw jobs increase by 1%. Mr. Speaker, despite the increasing inflationary pressures experienced throughout 2022, Bermuda's overall rate of inflation remains relatively low compared to advanced economies, as reflected in the Consumer Price Index, which indicates an annual inflation rate of 3.8% for November 2022. The overall rate notwithstanding, food price inflation is still registering at 10.4%. However, the current trend of inflation indicates that it has peaked and is beginning to abate. Mr. Speaker, Bermuda's balance of payments continues to record relatively large current account surpluses, which are an important strength in the Bermudian economy. Bermuda's total current account surplus over the first 3 quarters of 2022 was recorded at $926 million. This figure is 25.8 more than the $736 million recorded over the first 3 quarters of 2021. Sustainable economic growth cannot be achieved without an expansion of jobs within our economy and a reduction of unemployment levels. In 2022, the total number of jobs filled in Bermuda increased by 402 posts, or 1.3%. This rebounded employment levels in the Bermuda economy comes as a result of the robust growth in the international business sector, our recovering tourism sector, and the professional, scientific, and technical sector, which collectively represented 76.1% of the total new jobs filled in 2022. For the second consecutive year, however, Mr. Speaker, jobs in positions of public administration have declined. The number of jobs filled went from 4,008 in 2021 to 3,883 in 2022, recording a decrease of 125 jobs, or 3.1%. Mr. Speaker, strong growth was observed in employment income for the first 3 quarters of 2022 and is estimated to increase by 6.6%, or $180.6 million when compared to the same period in 2021. This increase was driven by the international business sector, which saw an increase of $94.3 million, or 8.9%. Despite the uptick in inflation, both personal consumption and the retail sector showed signs of growth in 2022. Household personal consumption for the first 3 quarters was estimated to be $2.97 billion, reflecting an increase of 17.5%, or $441 million over 2021. Total gross turnover in the retail sector stood at $990.6 million, which represents a 3.1% increase in the first 10 months when compared against the previous year. Mr. Speaker, the positive growth across many major economic indicators signals a reversal of the downward trends experienced during the midst of the pandemic, with many indicators now nearing pre-pandemic levels. The growth of employment levels in our key sectors is evidence of increased confidence in our economy. Inflation is downward trending, and tourism is on a trajectory to reach pre-pandemic levels. However, we face several external risks: higher global interest rates, supply chain disruptions, geopolitical tensions, and the impact of climate change and its correlation with our insurance industry. We must therefore remain focused on creating sustainable growth through economic diversification and the strengthening of our core sectors, such as international business. Mr. Speaker, the international business sector, in particular the insurance and reinsurance industry, continues to be the bedrock of our economy. In 2020, it showed resilience by avoiding contraction, and then followed that in 2021 with its fastest year of growth in 15 years. In 2021, international business recorded its fastest year of growth in 15 years. It should be acknowledged that much of Bermuda's economic stability during the peak of the pandemic and subsequent recovery, as evidenced by the consecutive quarters of GDP growth, is largely as a result of the contributions of our most significant economic pillar. Mr. Speaker, in 2021, the international business sector contributed over $2 billion to the island's economy, with the largest direct contribution being $235 million in payroll tax. But the impact of the international business sector flows beyond payroll tax, as it has also spent more than $74 million on rent, $7 million in local entertainment, and donated $14 million to charity. It critically also provided educational scholarships and internships to young Bermudians. The international business sector is also a significant contributor to job growth. Since 2019, Mr. Speaker, jobs in international business have consistently increased, with 591 additional jobs created in the international business sector in the last 3 years, representing a growth rate. Yes. Mr. Speaker, this augurs well for the future and continues to reinforce our place as a leading international financial center. Mr. Speaker, an important aspect of credit rating reviews is that they provide an independent and non-political evaluation of Bermuda's ability and willingness to serve its financial obligations. Unbiased, as you would say, Mr. Speaker. These ratings are viewed as global affirmation of where we are economically and a metric to sustain existing business and attract new business to the island. Mr. Speaker, we were pleased to see that in May 2022, the ratings report from S&P reaffirmed Bermuda's A+ long-term sovereign credit rating and senior unsecured debt ratings, as well as its A1 short-term rating and its A+ convertibility assessment is stable. Within their report, S&P highlighted, and I quote, that they expect the next several years to continue to benefit from the growth in the international financial center and a pickup in tourism, and this growth will lead to reduced deficits and less borrowing, end quote. We were then further encouraged to see that in June, report from Moody's affirmed Bermuda's A2 issuer and senior unsecured bond rating, along with a stable outlook, and once again indicated that Bermuda's bonds are seen to be of good quality. The stable outlook reflects Moody's expectation that fiscal consolidation efforts will stabilize debt around current levels due to the rebound in tourism activity and strong growth in the international business sector. In October of 2022, KBRA's ratings report solidified the assessments of S&P and Moody's, as they affirmed Bermuda's long-term credit rating with a stable outlook. KBRA stated in their report that their decision was on their expectation that Bermuda would be largely resilient to global corporate tax reform. Mr. Speaker, these ratings are an objective endorsement of the government's fiscal and economic policies, which are aimed at strengthening the economy as the country rebounds from the COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. Speaker, this 2023-24 budget is not made in a vacuum. There is a context and a framing to the fiscal decisions made by this government. That context demands that we conduct a careful examination of the past in order to better understand this present and the future. Mr. Speaker, it has been the greatest honor of my political life to serve as Bermuda's Premier. It is humbling to know that my constituents, the Progressive Labor Party, and the people of Bermuda have entrusted me with the often difficult task of leading this government. I do not take it lightly and commit myself to giving my all every day in their service. The uniqueness of politics in Bermuda means that as the opposition, or anyone who opposes this government, you can often choose your fiction, repeat that fiction, engage others to do the same in various avenues, and some people will even believe it. Such efforts are enhanced by a willing media whose sensational and often wrong headlines fuel innuendo and falsehoods that distort this government's record of success and progress for the people. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I will not rely on others to tell the story. So in framing this budget, I wish to reaffirm the record of the Progressive Labor Party in managing the fiscal debacles left by the One Bermuda Alliance. And I want to do that because that context is critical to understanding just how significant this budget is to Bermuda and her people. So, Mr. Speaker, I will use this speech as an opportunity to remind the people of this country of the progress made on their behalf, despite the hand that we were dealt in 2017 with the failed Morgan's Point project and an unwise airport privatization that have jointly cost taxpayers $250 million. Over $250 million. I will use this speech to remind the people of Bermuda of the progress that has been made despite a once-in-a-century pandemic. And, Mr. Speaker, I will use this speech to make clear the difference in philosophy between this PLP government and the opposition. Mr. Speaker, in July 2017, the people of Bermuda voted to change the direction of this country and entrusted the Progressive Labor Party to bring about that change. The people chose to put an end to one of the most divisive periods in recent memory and elected this government to build a better and fairer Bermuda. We are proud of what we have accomplished thus far. However, we are equally aware that more can and should and must be done to ensure the dreams and aspirations represented by that resounding win at the polls in 2017 and, to a greater extent, in 2020 are realized. Mr. Speaker, in 2017, Bermudians wanted a government that was rooted in fairness for its people. A government that would bring the change that Bermuda needed in a fair and non-divisive fashion so that as a country, we could all advance to our full potential. Mr. Speaker, governing through these unpredictable times has not been easy. And just as I can humbly admit that we have not got everything right, I can assure the public that we have not lost sight of the mandate we were given over 5 years ago. Further, we have made progress on the issues that matter to the people of Bermuda, whom we all represent in this honorable House. Mr. Speaker, Bermuda's high cost of living has been the primary issue of concern for voters, well before the recent price increases due to factors largely outside of the control of the government. The world has experienced the highest rate of inflation in 40 years. And though our overall inflation may be less than other countries, we are already starting from a higher base price. And therefore, working people in this country feel the impact just as much as the rest of the world. The people of Bermuda expect their government to act to provide relief for many hardworking Bermudians and their families. Mr. Speaker, that is what we have done, and that is what we will continue to do in this budget. Mr. Speaker, that is why we reduced payroll tax for working families from its highest level in history in 2016 under the opposition to the lowest level in history under this government. That is why in 2018, we reduced the duty on essential grocery items, and in 2020, eliminated duty on essential goods, while working with importers and grocers to ensure those savings were passed down to the customers. That is why we amended legislation to address banking fees to help put an end to unjust banking practices. That is why we provided direct financial support to parents of public school students, delivered a payroll tax rebate for workers earning under $96,000. We eliminated payroll tax for disabled workers and eliminated land tax for registered charities and nursing homes. Mr. Speaker, that is why, while gas prices were soaring throughout the world, we acted to freeze local fuel prices to protect families and businesses against record oil prices. If we had not acted, families would have paid $20 more each time they fueled their vehicles. Taxi drivers, $35 more, Mr. Speaker. And that is why this government has also launched a flagship mortgage guarantee program, which reduced mortgage rates for hundreds of Bermuda's families. Mr. Speaker, seniors may have seen many decades come and go, but they have not forgotten that when requesting a pension increase to maintain their standard of living, the former government told them that, and I quote, "money doesn't grow on trees," end quote. Our seniors can vividly remember being cast aside by the OBA during their 55 months of governing. And that is why, in 2017, our seniors voted for a government that understands the challenges they face and will fight to ensure they can live out their golden years in the comfort they so richly deserve. Mr. Speaker, that is why this government continues to increase our seniors' pensions at the rate of inflation and amended legislation to provide better standards of care in our care homes. That is why we extended the personal home care benefit and introduced local radiation therapy coverage for Future Care and HIP. That is why we increased Future Care prescription drug benefit from $2,000 to $3,000 a year and introduced interest-free loans of up to $15,000 for families who need help modifying their homes. And that is why this government also recently approved funding to increase the stock of affordable housing for families generally and our seniors. And yes, Mr. Speaker, we recognize that we must continue to do more to help our seniors live in dignity. Mr. Speaker, in 2017, our parents and students were discouraged by the state of the country's education system and the lack of opportunities the former government provided Bermudians to enhance their skills and further education. Let us not forget that it was the former government that reintroduced fees to Bermuda College while cutting scholarships and shortchanging our public education system. Mr. Speaker, this government has been committed to undoing the damage done by the opposition and restoring faith in our public education system. That is why we installed high-speed internet and Wi-Fi in all primary schools and middle schools and supplied all primary and M1 students with Chromebooks. That is why we provided funding for new mathematics programs, resulting in significantly improved outcomes for all of our primary schools. That is why we advanced the most significant public education reform in a generation and have successfully launched signature schools this year. And that is why we ensure that every Bermudian who wants to access further education at Bermuda College can do so. That is why we increased scholarship funding for students attending overseas institutions, amended legislation to allow Bermudian students with an ACCA designation to be fully recognized as registered accountants in Bermuda. However, Mr. Speaker, we recognize that more can be done, and this budget will do more for public education. Mr. Speaker, in 2017, the call for our union partners and other stakeholders was for their government to put forth policies to protect the workers of this country, as they are the driving force of our economy. That is why we provided hospital workers and teachers with their first pay rise since 2011, and why we will implement a minimum wage for the first time in this country's history, ensuring that all receive a basic level of pay for their work. That is why we have implemented the youth employment strategy to facilitate greater opportunities for young Bermudians. That is why we introduced work permit moratoriums on 52 categories, the most in Bermuda's history, and that is why we passed new labor legislation that strengthened trade unions while also increasing protections against bullying and sexual harassment. Mr. Speaker, we recognize that more still can be done, and the budget presented today will do more to support the advancement of workers' rights in this country. Mr. Speaker, we've decriminalized possession of up to 7 grams of cannabis, introduced a tax on dividend payments for the first time in history. We're the first government to implement roadside sobriety testing and the first to provide public notification when sex offenders are released from their prison sentence. Our record will show that we have awarded over $1 million in capital development grants, community clubs, breathing new life in these facilities from the east end of the island, Mr. Speaker, all the way to your place, Somerset Cricket Club. I could go on, Mr. Speaker, as we have made great progress despite the challenges. But as I have said, we recognize that more must be done. And this budget presented by the government today will do more to advance the progress that voters expect from their government. Mr. Speaker, the people of Bermuda still vividly remember the One Bermuda Alliance doubling our national debt, having the largest deficits in Bermuda's history, being downgraded by independent ratings agencies. Bermudans are still feeling the effect of their failed Morgan's Point project, bad airport deal, and let us not forget furlough days. In 2017, Bermudians looked to the Bermuda Progressive Labor Party to reduce our deficit, maintain our reputation as a global financial center, diversify our economy, and to encourage more economic parity. Despite the bad hand we were dealt and the devastating blows caused by the pandemic, this government is proud to see the policies that we have put in place since returning to office begin to bear fruit with the growing economy. Declining deficits, strongest growth of our international business sector in 15 years, and sustained stable outlooks from rating agencies. We are also pleased to see our net debt position lower than forecast. And, Mr. Speaker, we are still on track for a balanced budget in 2024-2025. But what is vital for this trajectory to continue is for this government to be laser focused on creating the conditions for continued economic growth in Bermuda. And that, Mr. Speaker, is the title of this budget statement. Mr. Speaker, our continued mission and goal is to further advance the cause of balance and sustainable economic growth for the benefit of the people of Bermuda. Last year, Mr. Speaker, I spoke of the need to focus on economic growth, and that is what this government has delivered over the past year. The economic growth we have seen this year has been built on the economic growth we had last year. That means that we are successfully executing Bermuda's economic recovery plan. And in line with that plan, it is expected that Bermuda's GDP in 2022 will return to pre-pandemic levels. Mr. Speaker, although that is good news, let's be clear. This economic recovery is not touching all of our residents, and many feel that they are going backwards. It makes no sense to speak about positive economic statistics when people do not feel positive about their economic situation. Economic growth doesn't matter when any gains in wages are eaten up by increasing food prices or increases in monthly mortgage payments. Mr. Speaker, Bermuda's economic future is bright. Having returned to where we were before the pandemic, we must now look forward to growing the economy to ensure that it works for all Bermudians. We must move forward with optimism, knowing that Bermuda has weathered the economic storm of the pandemic, despite the challenges in our tourism sector due to the closure of our largest hotel. All facts and statistics indicate that our economy has continued to grow. And that, Mr. Speaker, is what this budget is about: economic growth. It is about making sure that we invest in our infrastructure, which is suffering from years of underinvestment. This budget is about ensuring that the people of Bermuda can build on the success of the past, build on our successful navigation of the coronavirus pandemic, build on the successful execution of Bermuda's economic recovery plan, and build a secure future for all Bermudians. Mr. Speaker, the economic recovery plan is a key feature of the government's comprehensive economic development strategy, which will be unveiled by the Honorable Member, the Minister of Economy and Labor, in the current coming months. The economic development strategy will provide a strategic framework that will guide Bermuda to sustainable economic growth and development. The economic development strategy contains strategic priorities and initiative that will provide direction and drive work plans of Bermuda's economic development organizations. It's important to note this, Mr. Speaker, because the economic development strategy is in addition to the economic recovery plan. It is just one part. In addition to the execution of the economic recovery plan, other strategic priorities include the retention and expansion of local and international business, increasing foreign direct investment, marking Bermuda's value proposition and business ecosystem, developing local entrepreneurship, increasing the working population, and workforce development. Mr. Speaker, the economic recovery plan combines fiscal responsibility with a clear path to sustained economic growth, employment, and greater economic development. The plan was developed in 2022 in response to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and has progressed to phase 3 of its implementation. Mr. Speaker, it is worth noting that a dedicated project management office was established last year to ensure that the 31 priority initiatives under the economic recovery plan are implemented efficiently and in a timely manner. The team have been instrumental in progressing these initiatives as they monitor, track, report, and lend assistance where required. Mr. Speaker, when discussing the economic recovery plan, it is also critical that we acknowledge the plan's benchmarks, which suggests that the successful implementation of the 31 priority initiatives should deliver between 1.3 and 1.5% growth per year above baseline economic growth from 2023, the year that we are in, leading to an improvement of Bermuda's fiscal position. Mr. Speaker, I'm encouraged to see the mentioned priority initiatives advancing with 80% on track and many already demonstrating positive results. For example, the Economic Investment Certificate, which to date has generated over $369 million through direct investment to Bermuda's economy, and the Work from Bermuda program, which has seen 1,139 applications approved. And as of November last year, Mr. Speaker, 259 Work from Bermuda certificate holders remain on island, positively contributing to our economy. Yes. Mr. Speaker, almost 9 years after the previous administration passed the Gaming Act, Bermuda does not have a casino. Amendments made since that time have not been enough to address the obstacles that seem designed to prevent this industry from taking hold in this jurisdiction. What is clear, Mr. Speaker, is having the integrated resort model as the only available option for casino operation is a flaw in the inherited regime. The law must be amended to permit casino operators to choose the model that best suits the intended venue for their casino. Likewise, the law must be amended to permit the Gaming Commission the flexibility to consider and grant licenses on that basis. To reinforce the regulatory responsibilities of the Gaming Commission, Mr. Speaker, these amendments will be accompanied by a revised definition of minister in the Act to establish the Minister of Finance as the minister, similar to the Bermuda Monetary Authority. It is anticipated that these changes will address impediments to operational and business support for gaming in Bermuda. Mr. Speaker, the number of parents seeking medical care outside their home country, popularly called medical tourism, is growing at a rapid rate around the world, and Bermuda is uniquely positioned to take advantage of this opportunity. A committee of stakeholders, along with leading professionals, investigated the opportunity further, and given Bermuda's proximity to the United States and Canada, its desirable climate for medical treatment recovery, and its positive reputation for quality and standards, Bermuda was determined to be an ideal location for a world-class medical tourism facility. Mr. Speaker, this facility will create employment during the construction and operational phase, and it will also benefit existing hospitality facilities, restaurants, and lead to increased usage of the airport and ground transportation. This will have a positive impact on Bermuda's GDP for the financial benefits of thousands of new tourists, resort fees, and medical professionals moving and living on the island. It will also create opportunities for training of Bermudians to fill technical positions within the new medical facility. We are pleased to have received interest from leading U.S. academic medical centers and foreign investors, and we anticipate making a further announcement on this key initiative during the third quarter of 2023. Mr. Speaker, this government continues to support small and medium enterprises through the Bermuda Economic Development Corporation, which provided over $6 million in support to 334 local businesses in the form of loans, grants, and guarantees. The Office of the Uptown Development Authority officially opened in September 2022, and the interim project team has been engaged with the Economic Development Department and the Bermuda Business Development Agency on the approved residential schemes and is in the early stages of connecting developers and investors with opportunities within the country's economic empowerment zones. Mr. Speaker, this government is also acutely aware of the challenges we currently face concerning housing and is pleased to see the interest from developers in approved residential schemes. The guidelines of the scheme allow for large-scale residential mixed-use developments in Bermuda's economic empowerment zones and also provide the opportunity for restricted persons to purchase units within these schemes. Mr. Speaker, the government also recently published a position paper regarding minimum wage in Bermuda, which outlines what a minimum wage is, why it is necessary, and the proposed minimum wage rate of $16.40 to come into force on the 1st of June, 2023. The government has also put in place a mortgage guarantee program, which I will speak about later, Mr. Speaker, as part of its work to lower interest rates. Mr. Speaker, we've invested in the construction of electric bus charge facilities at Dockyard, St. George, and Fort Langton bus depots in support of the fleet electrification program. And additionally, both the National Reemployment Job Strategy and the Youth Employment Strategy are currently being implemented. And Mr. Speaker, people are asking why I'm going over all those matters, because those are all of the things that are included in the Economic Recovery Plan. And I want to make sure that honorable members are clearly up to date with what is happening. Mr. Speaker, the government, along with the Project Management Office, will continue to work with the private sector and other stakeholders to ensure that the 31 priority items progress forward. The continued successful implementation of the Economic Recovery Plan initiatives will create better conditions for sustainable economic growth. Mr. Speaker, the next section is entitled Bermuda is a global leader in digital assets. Mr. Speaker, Bermuda's investment in digital assets is already showing steady progress. This year will mark 5 years since the passage of the Digital Asset Business Act. In that time, Bermuda has been gradually attracting companies, building experience in navigating the risk of this innovative new industry, and refining its regime. This strategy is bearing fruit as Bermuda has developed a reputation for a clear, well-thought-out approach to the industry that differs from other jurisdictions attempting to build industries in this rapidly changing space. Many jurisdictions have set their eyes on developing a digital asset industry, and some of those have already come and gone. Bermuda set the tone early by being one of the first countries in the world to have a comprehensive license regime for the digital asset industry. And since 2018, we have been accumulating unmatched experience globally, Mr. Speaker, in regulating the associated risks. Innovators want clear and stable rules within which they can demonstrate that they are appropriately managing risk while not being stifled. Bermuda's only weakness, Mr. Speaker, in terms of attracting more companies, a limited banking market, will be addressed by the launch of Jewel Bank. Bermuda now has 16 licensed digital asset businesses, with 6 of those licenses have been issued in 2022. Early indications that 2023 will be a strong year of growth, with more companies getting licensed as Bermuda has become more attractive to those players seeking to differentiate themselves through strong regulatory oversight. In parallel, Bermuda has seen strong growth in the digital asset insurance business through the innovative insurer regime introduced in 2019, with 8 licensed insurers working with digital assets. 4 of those licenses were issued in 2022, and they include what may be the world's first licensed insurance for digital asset life insurance. As businesses in this sector become established, we've also seen job growth. Crucially, existing companies have shown a promising and welcome commitment to Bermudian job growth. Companies such as Realm Insurance and Bittrex Global have invested in all Bermudian staffing, with 13 and 6 local employees, respectively. The impact of a strong commitment to Bermudian hiring cannot be understated, as these Bermudians are receiving training and experience that will be invaluable as this industry grows. These businesses are hiring Bermudians because, unlike other industries, Mr. Speaker, this sector is changing so quickly that it is not possible to simply hire experienced people from other jurisdictions. That rapid pace necessitates investment in the training and development of new hires, and is encouraging to see strong investment in the training of Bermudians. These individuals are getting in on the ground floor of the new industry and will likely be the future leaders of the local and global digital asset industry. Mr. Speaker, this government has never been more confident in the future of the digital asset industry in Bermuda. The fact that we are attracting the attention of the top global players in this area and that our regulation is referenced in the United States, European Union, and in Asia as the gold standard of digital asset regulation is something of which we should all be proud. Our excellence in insurance innovation has transferred to digital innovation, and thanks to the stellar reputation of the Bermuda Monetary Authority, Bermuda will become home to major participants in this industry. Mr. Speaker, many people have criticized or even mocked the government's decision to establish Bermuda as a home for the future of digital finance. Yet Singapore, a well-guarded jurisdiction, is advancing their own digital asset regulation, in many ways matching what we have had in place in Bermuda since 2018, while other jurisdictions who are seen as innovators in this space are copying our regime. Mr. Speaker, I would caution honorable members who make a habit of criticizing Bermuda's decision to embrace the opportunities that digital finance offers for Bermuda's future. Companies looking at making Bermuda their global home want to know that honorable members on both sides of the political divide support economic diversification and are able to embrace the future. I invite the honorable leader of the opposition, in his reply next week, to make clear his party's support for the growth of this industry in Bermuda. Mr. Speaker, Bermuda's economy relies heavily on the international business sector, in particular the insurance and reinsurance industry, thus making it vulnerable to external shocks. In an effort to make Bermuda more resilient to such risks, the government will further diversify the financial services on the island, including the expansion of banking services that support key initiatives within Bermuda's economic recovery plan. Mr. Speaker, it is understood that some of the existing local banks may be unable to service some economic recovery plan initiatives without threatening existing correspondent banking relationships. However, that does not mean the status quo is acceptable, Mr. Speaker, and the government is firmly committed to the modernization and diversification of the banking sector in Bermuda. The aim is to develop and implement a revised banking model for our country that reflects its uniqueness and is consistent with our reputation as a quality international financial center. Mr. Speaker, in keeping with the Ministry of Finance's core objective to achieve financial stability and promote stable economic growth, it was determined that a review would be needed to determine the appropriate way to balance national interests against commercial interests in the banking sector. The review was completed by the Bermuda Monetary Authority last year, and that review's report is intended to assist the government in managing not only the risks that confront our economy, but also the challenges that consumers face from a lack of diversification in the banking sector. In support of the above, the report envisions that Bermuda's banking sector will include the following: domestic and full-service banks, which are required to offer services that meet the full range of domestic and retail customer needs. Narrow-purpose banks, which would permit to service sectors that are currently associated with higher reputational risk, such as gaming. Specialized international banks, which would be permitted to focus solely on providing global solutions internationally, including to underserved areas. And credit unions providing services under the Credit Unions Act. Mr. Speaker, the government is fully supportive of the introduction of these initiatives, and while incumbent banks have the competitive advantage of being more familiar with regulatory requirements, it is accepted that different innovations are required to enhance the banking experience in Bermuda. This is supported by the number of related banking sector initiatives currently underway within the Ministry of Finance, working together with the Bermuda Monetary Authority. In addition to banking sector diversification, work to further strengthen transparency and conduct-related obligations are advanced stages of the policy development project, with rules due to be tabled this year. Additionally, The government will support the Bermuda Monetary Authority in advancing open banking standards in Bermuda to provide better services for local consumers while enabling new digital banking services to be offered. Mr. Speaker, work on the government's flagship initiative to create a Bermuda digital bank, in which Bermudians will have an ownership stake, is progressing. The Bermuda Digital Bank is critical, as it is not only keeping with this government's pledge of building a nation of owners, but also aims to diversify the banking services and products available on island. The initial business plan presented a number of pathways to implement the Bermuda Digital Bank, and the Ministry of Finance continues to work with the Bermuda Monetary Authority to determine the best path forward to execute this project in the near term, while ensuring the bank meets the standards for being licensed in Bermuda. To the Mortgage Guarantee Program, Mr. Speaker, important issue for lots of persons in Bermuda, especially with interest rates rising. Mr. Speaker, in October of last year, the government proudly launched its Mortgage Guarantee Program, a pilot program where the government provides a partial guarantee in support of local mortgages with the Bermuda Commercial Bank. The government's support reduced the risk to the bank, and in return, the bank is offering not only reduced interest rates starting at 5%, but also a reduced down payment requirement from the standard 20% down to 10%. As we are currently in the first of 3 phases where first-time home buyers under the age of 40 are eligible, we are encouraged to see that to date, over 135 applications have been received, with 12 applicants having been approved thus far. That is 12 Bermudians under the age of 40 and counting who are able to own their own piece of the rock, who would not have been able to do so otherwise, Mr. Speaker. With that said, I'm pleased to announce that beginning on the 1st of April, 2023, we'll be transitioning into phase 2 of the program, where public officers with mortgages at other institutions will be eligible to transfer them over and to participate in the program. It should be noted, Mr. Speaker, this does not apply to mortgages where public officers may own multiple properties or does not reside in the home. Also, as a part of phase 2, Mr. Speaker, we will be removing the age restriction so that any Bermudian, regardless of age, may be able to apply for a new mortgage for their first home. Mr. Speaker, after 2 challenging years in the world of tourism in 2022, it became a pivotal year for the sector. Following wild-scale deployment of COVID-19 vaccines and boosters, visitors began to take advantage of the resurgence in both domestic and international travel. While Bermuda has not yet returned to 2019 visitor volumes, the island saw significant year-over-year growth in 2022 across key tourism measures, including air capacity, leisure air visitors, and cruise travel. When comparing 2022 to 2021, the total number of leisure visitors was up 80%, air capacity was up 50%, and cruise arrivals, understandably, Mr. Speaker, were 2,735% higher. Though significant increases were seen in 2022, year-end statistics underscore that more work remains to be done before reaching the baseline numbers of 2019. Mr. Speaker, in 2023, this island can expect a historic increase in cruise arrivals, which will positively impact the tax revenue and generate more visitor traffic to businesses at each port. The record cruise season will provide more funds to the Bermuda Tourism Authority's budget to execute the National Tourism Plan. Mr. Speaker, the island's hotel inventory has been a limiting factor contributing to the challenge of securing a full return to 2019 air capacity levels. American Airlines service from Charlotte and British Airways London Heathrow Gateway were bright spots in 2022, allowing visitors additional connections to the United States and Europe. The Bermuda Tourism Authority will continue to support the Ministry of Transport through Air Service Development Committee to identify needs, engage new and familiar partners, and create demand in order to make the case for expanded airlift as more hotel properties come online. Mr. Speaker, there is continuing work to open the Bermuda Beach Hotel, the completion of Phase 2 for the reopening of the St. George's Club, and the progress of the Ariel Sands property, in addition to work taking place in your neighborhood, Mr. Speaker, Cambridge Beaches. It is clear that there is significant potential for increase in employment in the hospitality sector in the current year. Mr. Speaker, as indicated in November's throne speech, to support additional investment in Bermuda's tourism economy, the government will make amendments to the Tourism Investment Act to permit the government greater discretion in the granting of relief under the Act to developers and those investing in attractions, restaurants, and hotels. The aim of these amendments is to provide incentives for establishments to invest in upgrades and refurbishment of their properties and, in turn, create jobs while enhancing the overall product available to visitors. The mission of this government is to contain sustainable growth in Bermuda's economy, and to do so, that we must be competitive with other jurisdictions competing with Bermuda for tourism investment. As I've said before, Mr. Speaker, right now, we are not competitive, and these changes will ensure that we attract investment to grow jobs and provide a brighter future for Bermuda's tourism sector. Mr. Speaker, the redevelopment of the Fairmont Southampton Hotel is eagerly awaited. In the months since this Honorable House considered the legislation to support the project, lawyers, development consultants, bankers, and technical officers have been heavily engaged in the preparation of the various agreements that will provide the framework for financing and development. Mr. Speakers will be no doubt aware that the process for the consideration of a revised special development order has begun, with the first public consultation meeting with the neighboring residents set for early next week. Further, Mr. Speaker, honorable members will be invited to consider amendments to the Public Treasury Administration and Payments Act 1969 to strengthen the protections for the government of Bermuda in the provision of the $75 million guarantee of local lending support to the redevelopment project. The unique arrangement for the repayment of that loan requires our legislation to be modified to facilitate the structure of the loan agreement. The proposed changes will add necessary certainty and security as the government is determined to apply best practice and fulfill all necessary due diligence, as it is what the people of Bermuda who are supporting this critical redevelopment project. Yes, Mr. Speaker, due diligence in the provision of guarantees, something that others may have been, wise to do. Mr. Speaker, confidence remains high that construction will begin in the second quarter of this year. And in preparation for this commencement, the developers have been repricing construction costs. The volatility in capital markets delayed the confirmation of financing, but it is a testament to the developers and their investors' confidence in Bermuda that the capital for the project's completion has been secured. Mr. Speaker, 2024 completion remains the target, and can I assure the people of Bermuda that all parties have demonstrably committed to advancing this project. Its economic importance has been magnified in recent years as we struggle to maintain key airlift and grow Bermuda's market share in the meeting and large group business. Mr. Speaker, late last year in this Honorable House, we were pleased to pass the Morgan's Point Company Bill to enable the people of Bermuda to take control of the property. Today, as part of this budget statement, I am pleased to share with the public the reimagined vision led by the Bermuda Progressive Labor Party government, which has been approved by the Cabinet. Mr. Speaker, in light of what was previously proposed to the site, we should begin with what the project will not be. Phase 1 of the redevelopment plan will not involve the construction of a hotel. We are also not proposing at this stage that there will be condominiums for sale. Both concepts have been thoroughly vetted by our advisors, and as a government, we have determined that neither represents the best use of the site at this time. Instead, Mr. Speaker, we have targeted this mixed-use site for the development of a range of residential rental apartments, including a component for seniors housing, with an active and engaging amenities district filled with commercial, retail, and restaurant opportunities at its center. To be clear, Mr. Speaker, the newly proposed Morgan's Point will not be operated as a gated community, and the amenities district will be open for all Bermuda's residents. The new enterprise will not only put the site into productive use, but will also address several long-standing key goals of this government regarding economic stimulus and increasing housing supply. At the center of this redevelopment, Mr. Speaker, is the concept of live, work, play, all on site. Mr. Speaker, the goals moving forward are simple. We want to put the site into productive use and generate cash returns that more than cover the cost of construction so that Bermuda can recoup the funds that were paid out for the $165 million guarantee agreed by the former government. Our job is to recoup the funds that were paid out for the $165 million guarantee. And as you know, Mr. Speaker, we paid out a lot more than $165 million. I think we're at $210 million and counting. And counting, yes. The guarantee agreed by the former government. The vision for operating the site is to provide opportunities in the hospitality, retail, and services sector, while also offering a concentrated residential community for the taxi, minibus, and in due course, water taxi and ferry industry to target. So, Mr. Speaker, how do we get there? Mr. Speaker, honorable members will be aware that at present, the assets of Georges Bay Limited comprise mostly of completed high-end residential buildings and 6 concrete shells, with 1 yet to be erected. Between these 2 sets of partial structures is a wide expanse of land that had been intended for use as amenities for the hotel. Under the new plan, the residential buildings will be completed as high-end rental residences as intended. Completion of these units is the highest return exercise on the site, as they were substantially complete when the project went into financial distress. The non-erected concrete shell, along with the other 6 functionally identical shells. The non-erected concrete shell will be erected, along with the other 6 functionally identical shells, and they will be reconditioned as ocean-facing residential duplex apartment units. Although there is capacity for 42 units, at this time, only 3 blocks consisting of 18 units will be completed. This, of course, subject to real estate demand, could increase and support the completion of all 42 as a part of Phase 1. Mr. Speaker, the centerpiece of the project will be the reimagined amenities district. Placed between the 2 existing structures, it will consist of a diverse series of commercial, retail, restaurant, and services provided at ground level, and built on top of them 2 floors containing 48 residential units. These central amenities district apartments will be in the affordable range for most Bermudians and will consist of 1, 2, and 3-bedroom apartments. Further, an additional percentage of the amenity districts will be priced in a further discounted range to expand opportunities for young Bermudians. Mr. Speaker, we see the 37-acre Morgan's Point site and plan as based on commercial principles. However, it should also be viewed through an economic opportunity lens, in the sense that this project will generate economic activity for the country, especially in the western part of the island. Investment in Phase 1 will serve as a platform for future phases around the Morgan's Point land, and as expected, future phases will likely drive higher commercial output for the Bermuda government. A stylish, pedestrian, and bicycle-friendly integrated boardwalk supporting 19,000 square feet of amenities district rentable area will include unique restaurants and bars, branded and boutique shops, and other stores offering convenience and necessities. Together, these will become the draw factor for residents and increase commercial activity on the western side of the island. Additionally, the repurposing of the existing back-of-house shell for a potential farmers market and local food hall will provide another 13,000 square feet of rentable concession space for a grand total of 32,000 square feet of active retail, dining, and commercial options. The design of the boardwalk and future bridge elements also provide integrated outdoor seating and gathering spaces evocative of New York's High Line Walkway Park. World-class facilities will unlock the value and demand for the 101 residential units proposed in Phase 1. Mr. Speaker, we recognize that projects of this size and complexity come with challenges, and the public would be well within their rights to express skepticism over the execution of government contracts. To address this, we have put a comprehensive process in place. Mr. Speaker, to oversee governance and control of a selection of management team and independent directors of the board will be critical and should have the relevant expertise in hospitality, project management, finance, and infrastructure development. The independent board of directors will conduct regular meetings with the project execution team in order to receive periodic key performance indicators on progress and quality. Full requests for proposals with independent scoring will be issued for key partners in the execution of this project, with experience in large-scale on-island projects seen as a must. Mr. Speaker, the initial cost estimates for this phase are $130 million. Discussions about the fundraising process will be run in parallel with the design and definition of cost elements. Our present assumptions on financing consist of 2 debt tranches. a combination of a senior debt tranche secured against Morgan's Point land and applicable assets is built, and a subordinated debt tranche provided by a local Bermuda bank backed by a government guarantee. Both tranches will be backed either by a security of the property or sovereign guarantee, thus minimizing interest costs. Importantly, the construction and operation of Phase 1 will increase the value of the remaining land assets under the control of the government and will serve as a land bank for future development. Moving past tourism and development, Mr. Speaker, onto matters closer to finance and taxes. Mr. Speaker, one of the most important and challenging matters that the government has to tackle this year is the effective implementation of the Global Minimum Tax Initiative, which has been advanced by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. To achieve this aim, the Ministry of Finance has formed an international tax working group consisting of specialists in international tax matters and representatives of various bodies whose members may be directly impacted by this work. The group is tasked with examining how Bermuda can appropriately implement this global agreement, taking into account the diversity and complexity of our international business sector. Mr. Speaker, the global minimum tax will represent a fundamental change in the way that Bermuda does business and the way that Bermuda's government raises revenue. However, it is not without its risks. Mr. Speaker, Bermuda does have the Exempted Undertakings Tax Protection Act, 1966. And 8,000 exempted companies in Bermuda are in possession of a certificate from the Bermuda government that states that they will not be charged taxes on their income until 2035. However, Mr. Speaker, what is important to note, that possession of this certificate does not mean that companies will not be subject to the global minimum tax. The international agreement requires that for companies in scope, if the country where the company is domiciled does not charge a 15% minimum tax, then that company will be required to pay appropriate taxes to another jurisdiction. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, upon implementation of the framework by all key countries, the global minimum tax will be paid. The question is, to which country? Mr. Speaker, it is too early to estimate what impact the global minimum tax could have on Bermuda's future tax actions, and many complexities will have to be addressed in the development of the appropriate framework for Bermuda. However, it is my view as Minister of Finance that any fundamental shift in the nature or level of tax receipts in Bermuda should be used to benefit Bermuda's residents collectively, rather than representing a way to increase overall tax collections. Bermuda's system of taxation and our primary revenue earners of employer payroll tax and customs duty increase the cost of living and the cost of doing business in Bermuda. Any tax windfall that may accrue to the government from implementing the global minimum tax must result in a reduction in those taxes that increase the cost of doing business and the cost of living in Bermuda. Therefore, with a successful implementation of a global minimum tax, residents and businesses can likely expect further reduction in employer payroll taxes and customs duties. In turn, this will decrease the overall cost of doing business, the cost of living in Bermuda, to ensure the island remains competitive. Mr. Speaker, it is also important to note that honorable members note that a global minimum tax on international companies' income is not a given in any year. Bermuda's main sector of international business is our world-leading insurance industry. And yes, over time, most insurance companies make profits. However, in years where there are major catastrophe losses, these companies may not report a profit, and therefore will not be subject to the global minimum tax. Further, any losses in one year may offset future years' profits with regards to the global minimum tax. So whereas payroll tax and customs duties are always paid and represent a certain stream of tax revenue to the government, the same cannot be said for revenue that may come from the global minimum tax. Mr. Speaker, the International Tax Working Group is set to report its findings and provide recommendations to the government in July. After that, as I explained previously, the Tax Reform Commission will then be impaneled to look at the changes necessary to our existing system of domestic taxation to ensure that it is in line with the requirements of the global minimum tax, while also examining what other changes to our local taxes are needed to ensure that Bermuda's economy remains competitive. Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding the perceived benefits, there will be risks to Bermuda's economy with the implementation of the global minimum tax, as there will be some companies that decide that Bermuda is not the best option for them. Therefore, it is essential that we advance the reforms signaled by the Honorable Member, the Minister for Economy and Labor, to grow Bermuda's working population. Bermuda is regarded by some as an offshore jurisdiction, but as the global minimum tax sets standard rates throughout the world, we must adapt and become a midshore jurisdiction. Mr. Speaker, when I refer to being a midshore jurisdiction, it means that Bermuda must be a place where talented people from around the world desire to live and work. Simply put, we must make Bermuda a place that is more attractive for global talent looking to relocate so they can assist in powering our island's economic growth into the future. Mr. Speaker, I know that this perspective may cause fear in the minds of some Bermudians, and I understand why some may feel that way, because Bermuda is a difficult place now to live and thrive. Our costs are high and our labor market is tight, and people are nervous about their futures. However, Mr. Speaker, we cannot allow this fear of change prevent us from doing what is necessary to ensure that the government in this country can fulfill their obligations to future generations. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Member, the Minister of Economy and Labor, has made it painfully clear what will happen if we are unable to grow our working population. Mr. Speaker, instead of further reductions in taxes, as we are able to deliver in this budget due to our economy growing and our working population expanding, taxes in the future will increase if we do not grow our working population. Mr. Speaker, an increase in taxes will mean an increase in the cost of living in Bermuda, something that we know Bermuda's residents and businesses cannot afford. But, Mr. Speaker, it is important that honorable members in this chamber and those who are listening to this speech or read it in the coming days understand the difference in approach between this PLP government and the opposition. There are some who comment that the government's approach is similar to that of the opposition. But, Mr. Speaker, I could not disagree more. Why do I say that? Because this government has carefully and methodically engaged in wide consultation while dealing with reforms to Bermuda's immigration system. During its time in office, the previous government determined its course of action and basically said how it was to be achieved, or how citizens felt about it, did not matter. It sprang changed upon the electorate without consultation. And indeed, we all remember too well the results of their lack of consultation and the political instability that it caused. Mr. Speaker, compare that record to the approach of this PLP government. We kept our election promise to form a bipartisan committee on immigration reform, something that I called for in this honorable House in March 2013, when the Progressive Labor Party was in opposition. That bipartisan committee worked through the first stages of comprehensive immigration reform that enabled us to make sure that we eliminated the problem of mixed status families, made it easier for Bermudians born overseas to claim Bermuda status, and extended permanent residency to all long-term residents for the first time in this country's history. These changes have had a positive effect, but as the statistics show, we must do more, and we must move more quickly. However, Mr. Speaker, in this statement, understand, I am not going to pronounce what government policy will be regarding immigration, because we are currently engaged in the vital process of consultation. Instead, I encourage all persons, especially the opposition, who have had a lot to say in the media, to participate in this process, because it is vital that all views are heard as we expand our working population in Bermuda in a fair and balanced manner. Mr. Speaker, Given the need to grow our working population, we must ensure that there is more housing for people to live and work in Bermuda. Currently, there is an acute housing shortage, which is being driven by the growth that we have seen in international business over the last 3 years. Mr. Speaker, that is why the government committed to providing $15 million over the next 3 years to build more affordable housing units. And that is why it has also delivered 48 units of affordable housing over the past 5 years. 48 of the last 5, Mr. Speaker, 117 in the next 3. The transition of Morgan's Point to a residential community and the initial plan for 101 residential units will also provide additional housing in Bermuda for an expanding mid-shore economy. Mr. Speaker, in 2019, the government changed the Economic Development Act to allow for the building of approved residential schemes to further expand the housing stock. Currently, approved residential schemes are restricted to the economic empowerment zones in Somerset, St. George's, and Northeast Hamilton. However, those areas have not seen the progress that I sincerely desired for this initiative designed to provide more housing units. Though the team at the Bermuda Economic Development Corporation continue to work diligently to advance this initiative, and I mentioned some of the progress which they are making earlier, it is necessary, given the growth, that we expand the areas where approved residential schemes can be constructed. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, in this parliamentary session, the government will advance a bill that will amend the Economic Development Act to expand the eligibility for approved residential schemes from solely the economic empowerment zones to the entire city of Hamilton. We must do everything in our power to provide a base for additional private sector investment to develop additional housing in Bermuda to complement the government's efforts to provide affordable housing. Mr. Speaker, this change does not mean that we are abandoning our vision for a vibrant Northeast Hamilton economic empowerment zone. There will still be benefits to building approved residential schemes in Bermuda's economic empowerment zones that will not apply throughout the city of Hamilton. However, units in approved residential schemes in the city of Hamilton will be able to be purchased by residents, businesses, and international persons without restriction. Mr. Speaker, it is the duty of government to look at what is working and to see what can be done better. As we take concrete steps to increase the working population in Bermuda, we must ensure that this does not further raise the cost of housing, causing distress for many working families. This change will increase the available space that can be developed for approved residential schemes and incentivize the private sector to start developments that may have been stalled due to a lack of possible purchases. Now, Mr. Speaker, on to dollars and cents. Mr. Speaker, from a fiscal perspective, the primary focus of this government is to continue on our path towards a balanced budget and meet the target set by the Fiscal Responsibility Panel of a $50 million surplus by fiscal year 2026-27, all while ensuring fairness in our tax system and promoting economic growth to increase Bermuda's tax base. To achieve this, we must continue to make the difficult and sometimes unpopular decision to demonstrate to external stakeholders that the government of Bermuda can be trusted to exercise fiscal prudence. Mr. Speaker, earlier today I tabled the annual financial statements of the Consolidated Fund for fiscal year 2021-2022. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to report to this Honorable House that the Auditor General has issued a clear and unqualified audit opinion for the last fiscal year. A key highlight for this fiscal year was that the budget deficit narrowed significantly, with the actual budget deficit being recorded at $66 million. Mr. Speaker, total revenue for 2021-22 was $1.086 billion, which was $87 million higher than estimates, and $87.4 million higher than the previous year of $998.3 million. Total account expenditure, inclusive of debt interest on a modified cash basis, was $1.076 billion, which was $9.1 million less than adjusted estimates. Total capital accounts modified cash expenditure was $75.9 million, which was $16.9 million lower than the original budget estimates. Total capital and current account modified cash expenditure for 2021-22 was $1,152 million, which was $28 million higher than the original budget estimate. Mr. Speaker, as a reminder, the deficit for fiscal year 2020-2021 during the peak of the global pandemic was $184.2 million. The following year, Mr. Speaker, ended with a deficit of $66 million, despite continued payments to Skyport and despite the costs incurred by the Morgan's Point project. The $118 million improvement is reflective of the government's policies pursuing economic growth and commitment to effectively managing the public purse. However, as I will address later, this excellent budget performance masked significant underfunding of the hospital, which this government has remedied in this current fiscal year and will address further in the next fiscal year. Mr. Speaker, prior to commenting on the estimates for the new fiscal year, I would like to take this opportunity to provide an update on the government's financial performance and the revised forecast for the current year that will end on March 31st, 2023. Mr. Speaker, based on the latest revised estimates, the government is projected to earn $1.1 billion in revenue in 2022-23, which is 3.1% or $33.2 million higher than the original estimate. This increase in revenue is primarily due to better than expected tourism-related revenues, payroll tax, and stamp duty. Mr. Speaker, this increase helped to offset the $17.8 million loss in revenue from the aircraft register as a result of the Russia-Ukraine war. Also, despite the $11.6 million of foregone duty to freeze fuel prices and $700,000 to date of foregone duty as a result of eliminating duty on essential goods. And Mr. Speaker, I must remind honorable members that that revenue performance was with no tax increases last year. We actually cut some taxes last year. Important to note, Mr. Speaker, because some people seem to not be able to keep the facts straight. Mr. Speaker, total current account expenditures, excluding debt service and guarantee management, are now projected to be $965.7 million, 2.2% or $20.6 million more than the $945 million currently originally budgeted. The primary factors for this increase in current account expenditure are an unbudgeted $15 million grant provided to Bermuda Hospitals Board, an additional $10 million in continued COVID-related expenses, and government's relief package. Oh yes. Mr. Speaker, in 2018, the government agreed for the hospital to receive $322 million of combined funding from government sources annually. It saddens me that the Bermuda government has never fully honored that commitment. And as a result, our hospital has gone from a position of having cash reserves to one where they now have an overdraft facility for daily operations. Mr. Speaker, I commend the Bermuda Hospitals Board for going to great lengths to reduce their expenses while remaining inside the fixed funding model agreed upon with the Bermuda government in 2018. However, Mr. Speaker, just as the government keeps its commitments to our bondholders, we must also keep our commitments to the Bermuda Hospitals Board to ensure our country's only hospital is properly funded. Therefore, the Cabinet approved a $15 million supplementary allocation to the Bermuda Hospitals Board in this fiscal year and will increase funding next year to ensure that our hospital is able to continue operating soundly. Mr. Speaker, the $10 million of additional spending on COVID-19 related expenses are a result of the effects of the pandemic lasting longer than originally expected. The additional COVID-19 related spending, including testing staff, the airport, and laboratory, along with additional PPE and testing equipment. Mr. Speaker, in addition to the relief package which provided support to hardworking families, last year, additional funding was given to Bermuda Police Service, the Bermuda Fire and Rescue Service, mental health services, independent living coordinators for young people aging out of care. Additional resources were also deployed to support local entertainment, boost youth employment, and expand summer camp slots. Mr. Speaker, when considering the revised revenue figures along with the revised current account expenditure for 2022-23, we are encouraged to see the primary surplus of $145.4 million, which is a 9.5% or $12.6 million improvement on the $132 million in the original estimates. The primary surplus is important because it indicates that the projected revenues can support the day-to-day running of the government and also cover our interest costs. Mr. Speaker, as a result of the one-time costs associated with the recent debt financing, the latest revised interest and guarantee management costs are projected to be $143.4 million, $13.7 million, or 10.5% more than originally budgeted. Also, as these are one-time costs, it is anticipated that they will decrease to $130.4 million in the upcoming fiscal year. Mr. Speaker, the original capital expenditure budget for 2022-23 was $73 million. However, as a result of the $7 million of additional funding approved to fund critical refurbishments to Tynes Bay Waste Energy Facility and the approval of $4.1 million of additional funding for affordable housing for Bermudians, total capital expenditure is expected to increase to $79.3 million. This amount is less than the $85 million expected in the mid-year update due to supply chain challenges delaying the implementation of some projects. Mr. Speaker, given the factors above, the latest revised estimate of the overall deficit is $77.4 million, 10.5% or $7.4 million more than originally estimated. As a reminder, this increase is primarily driven by the $15 million supplementary allocation to the Bermuda's Hospitals Board. But it is also a testament to the government's management of the public purse that despite providing additional funds for economic relief and affordable housing and millions foregone on freezing food prices and reduction in customs duties for essential goods, we are able to provide additional funding to our hospital, Mr. Speaker, and still remain close to budget targets. It is important to note that if it were not for the one-time costs of that debt refinancing, Mr. Speaker, we would have met this year's deficit target while also providing this needed support to the hospital. Mr. Speaker, let me move on to what everyone wants to hear, the 2023-24 budget estimates. Mr. Speaker, the budget for this upcoming year, 2023-24, projects revenues to reach $1.16 billion, which is 7.2% or $77 million above the original estimates for this current fiscal year. This level of increase is largely as a result of changes to payroll taxes, increase in tourism-related revenues, and increases to certain fees combined with expected continued economic growth. Mr. Speaker, total current account expenditure is forecast to increase by $27.5 million from the original 2023 budget estimate of $945.1 to $972.6 million. Mr. Speaker, based on the projected revenue and current account expenditure figures, the estimated primary surplus before interest on debt and capital expenditure is anticipated to be $179.9 million in fiscal 23-24. The estimate for interest and guarantee management is expected to be $130.4 million, which is $600,000 more than the original estimate from the previous year. With this, the current account surplus is budgeted to be $50.4 million. This figure is near pre-pandemic levels, demonstrating the government's continued commitment to fiscal prudence, effective management of the public purse, and moving towards achieving a balanced budget. Mr. Speaker, the government also understands the value of sound capital investments that will revitalize the country's infrastructure, support economic growth, create jobs, and improve our everyday quality of life. The projected capital expenditure for 23-24 is $96 million, or $23 million, some 31% more than the original 22-23 estimate. Mr. Speaker, when considering the above, the government plans to run a budget deficit of $43.5 million, $9.9 million higher than projected last year. However, taking into account the 2021-22 actual deficit, the projected deficits for 2022-23 and 2024, and the sinking fund balance, Mr. Speaker, the net debt at the end of this fiscal year will be $90.5 million lower than anticipated in last year's budget. Mr. Speaker, moving to current account expenditure. As I mentioned, current account expenditure for fiscal year 23-24 is estimated at $972.6 million. This figure represents an increase of 2.9% over last year's original estimate. What is interesting, Mr. Speaker, is that increase is in line with the figure projected by the Fiscal Responsibility Panel, which stated a more realistic level of spending for this year's budget would be $973.4 million. However, Mr. Speaker, where I disagree with the Fiscal Responsibility Panel's assessment is in their statement that spending discipline will be difficult to maintain in future years given past performance. When making that assessment, they were looking at increases in current account expenditure in previous years that were results of the ending of emergency cost-saving measures put in place during the COVID-19 pandemic, such as one-time wage reductions and reductions in travel or other expenses not possible during the pandemic. Additionally, unexpected continuing costs of the pandemic, such as the airport minimum revenue guaranteed, factored into the spending variances seen in previous years. As those cost pressures abate, the pressure to keep up that level of spending also decreases, allowing the government to realistically plan expenditure in future years. Mr. Speaker, the Cabinet is aware that the current expenditure level this year will carry over to next year, and that any new programs will need to be offset by revisions to existing ones, which in essence makes this a two-year budget. Current expenditure is expected to increase by 1% over the next two fiscal years, which has been inserted solely to take into account possible negotiated salary increases for public officers. Mr. Speaker, all ministries, except for Home Affairs, received a boost to funding levels this year. This level of current account spending sets this year as a realistic baseline for future budgets, as it adequately funds government services that have not been properly funded in previous years, including public works, national security, public transportation, economic development, healthcare and hospital funding, youth services, the judiciary, or services for our seniors. This level of spending is necessary to advance key government initiatives such as healthcare reform, education reform, continued implementation of Bermuda's Economic Recovery Plan, and the implementation of Bermuda's privacy protection legislation. This budget increases the child daycare allowances for parents, transitional living for young persons aging out of care, and care homes. It also funds the reintroduction of public health scholarships and air quality monitoring for those affected by BELCO emissions, while expanding social protections for families via financial assistance. Moving on to capital expenditure, Mr. Speaker. Bermuda's infrastructure has been challenged due to years of underinvestment. This underinvestment can be seen in simple ways, such as when the government lacks the capacity or the equipment to pave roads or clear seaweed off our beaches. This inability to maintain basic infrastructure is not keeping with an island that has become an important international financial center and aspires to have an even greater impact in the future. Mr. Speaker, we cannot keep starving our island of needed investments in infrastructure in the name of achieving a balanced budget. For this reason, Mr. Speaker, this budget contains $96 million in planned capital account expenditure, the highest budgeted capital spending in 13 years. Let me give you an example, Mr. Speaker. Honorable members, and especially honorable members from Session number 1 and 2, remember what happened in St. George's last year, where the infrastructure necessary to safely disembark ferry passengers to St. George's was inoperable. That failure resulted in the suspension of ferry services during the critical summer season and negatively impacted business in St. George's. Mr. Speaker, the reason why I must increase spending in this area is to ensure that our vital tourism industry is not further held back due to failures in our civil infrastructure, and that our citizens can have confidence in that infrastructure. This budget, therefore, contains funding for a number of projects that have been delayed for many years, where infrastructure has passed its useful life and needs to be urgently replaced. Because there have not been sufficient funds budgeted, key infrastructure and equipment continue to fall into disrepair, causing the government to spend excess funds on repair costs, while the delay in replacing infrastructure increases the risk of catastrophic failure. One such example is the floating dock at the Hamilton Ferry Terminal. It is not an exaggeration to state that we are one strong hurricane away from that floating dock being inoperable. Mr. Speaker, just imagine what would happen if we were not able to disembark passengers safely at the Hamilton Ferry Terminal, and the impact that would have on the residents who commute into the city using the ferry and those visitors who use ferries to get around the island. Lack of infrastructure investment poses real challenges to our successful future, and hoping things will not break is not a sound strategy for governance. In time, they will not be operable, and just like the temporary landfilling Pembroke residents endured last year, failure to invest in infrastructure has serious consequences. The most significant items of capital development expenditure in the 23-24 budget relate to further investments in the Tynes Bay waste-to-energy facility, additional affordable housing units, 40 new and additional electric buses, and infrastructure to support their charging, refits to our fast ferries, and investment to accommodate students at Bermuda's 2 new parish primary schools at Francis Patton and Purvis Primary. Additional funds have also been allocated to develop a new community health clinic in Somerset. Mr. Speaker, that might even be in your constituency. Purchase new public works equipment to reduce maintenance costs while providing key services like clearing seaweed from beaches, upgrading facilities that house public officers at the government quarry, DPT depot, Marine and Ports workshed, and replace aging vehicles and equipment for the Bermuda Police Service, the Fire Rescue Service, and the Department of Corrections. Finally, Mr. Speaker, this capital budget funds upgrades Bermuda's court facilities, additional investments in the government's IT systems, and most pleasing to motorists and honorable members, an increase in funding to repave roads in Bermuda. Mr. Speaker, in October of last year, the government announced its support for a $21.6 million grant to the Bermuda Housing Corporation to refurbish 137 housing units, inclusive of 77 additional units, which represent the entire vacant and derelict inventory owned by the corporation. We are encouraged by the progress made thus far in the project, and this project will not only create jobs, but stimulate economic activity, but also ultimately increase the stock of affordable housing as promised in both our 2017 and 2020 election platforms. Mr. Speaker, to preserve the Tynes Bay waste-to-energy facility until major refurbishment can begin, a stabilization program has recently been approved. This program consists of projects that focus on replacing the critical systems required to bridge the gap between their current condition and the newly renovated facility, with an estimated cost of $22 million. These projects specifically targeted failed or obsolete systems that can be replaced while working to maintain operations as best as possible, and will be integrated into the overall refurbishment works to avoid waste expenditure. These upgraded systems are intended to assimilate seamlessly with the largest refurbishment works. Now moving on to revenue measures in the 23-24 budget, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the following items are the revenue changes that form part of the revenue estimate for fiscal year 2023-2024. Mr. Speaker, the payroll tax changes in this budget that I am about to announce come as a result of meaningful consultation that has taken place following the release of the pre-budget reports. With our commitment to a transparent budgeting process, it was essential that the government shared its considerations and the challenges when faced with putting together an annual budget that maintained our path to a balanced budget in fiscal 24-25. It must be remembered that the revenue proposals contained in the pre-budget report were made against the backdrop of the loss of revenue from the aircraft registry due to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and lost funding as a result of the ending of the travel authorization. Those two items alone represented approximately $14 million in revenue that would not accrue to the government during the next fiscal year. However, Mr. Speaker, this is a budget for growth. And what is necessary for growth is that you support the businesses that can provide growth in the economy. That means not just international business, but also local business, large and small, our tourism establishments and our retail outlets. Mr. Speaker, before I go into the details, let me get to the headline. No business in Bermuda will pay any more in employer taxes in this budget than last year. All employer rates will either stay the same or will go down. Small businesses, the lifeblood of most economies, will see their payroll tax liability decline by as much as 43%. We will deliver payroll tax reductions to retailers, gyms, convenience stores, construction companies, and truckers. Our hotels and restaurants who are still recovering from the impact of the pandemic will see their payroll tax liability decline by 17%. Mr. Speaker, moving to the employee payroll tax, the headline is this. Any individual making $132,000 or less per year will pay less in payroll taxes next year. Yes, Mr. Speaker, this represents 86% of Bermuda's workforce. 86% of the workers in our economy who give their time and talents to produce for their employees will pay less in payroll taxes next year.
Sounds like an election.
Mr. Speaker, as I said at the start of my presentation today, this is a budget for growth. It is a budget that reflects that Bermuda must position itself to be a place that is attractive to business owners and business creators who will power the economic growth required for the Bermuda economy to succeed. Mr. Speaker, I have to chuckle because I heard an honorable member behind said it sounds like an election budget. You know what's funny, Mr. Speaker? They said the same thing last year, that it was election budget. We delivered well, we grow. If you put forward a good budget, it doesn't mean election's coming. It means that you have competent fiscal policies for economic growth, Mr. Speaker.
Bang, bang. Bang, bang.
Here we go, Mr. Speaker. Now to the eagerly awaited details. Employer payroll taxes. These are the details, Mr. Speaker. And I know that there's a few business people that are listening. Don't worry, Greg, I got you too. Businesses with an annual...
Let me remind members, any of the voices that contribute in here are in this section. Everyone else is be quiet.
Yes, sir.
We shouldn't have voices from either corner or the back of the gallery.
Got you, Mr. Speaker. Employer payroll taxes. Businesses with an annual payroll of up to $200,000 will see their payroll tax rate move from 1.75 to 1%, reducing their payroll tax liability by 43%. Businesses with an annual payroll between $200,000 and $350,000 will see their tax rate move from 3.5% to 2.5%, reducing their payroll tax liability by 29%. Businesses with an annual payroll of $350,000 to $500,000 will see their payroll tax rate move from 6.5% to 5.25%, reducing their tax liability by 19%. Businesses with an annual payroll between $500,000 and $1 million will see their payroll tax rate move from 9% to 7.5%, reducing their payroll tax liability by 17%. And, Mr. Speaker, this was not in the pre-budget reports. Businesses with an annual payroll of $1 million or more will see their payroll tax rate move from 10.25% to 10%, reducing their payroll tax liability by 2%. Now, MP Dunkley, let's take down some of those prices, please.
I'm surprised it's not being.
Exempted businesses will see no increase in tax liability, with their payroll tax rate remaining at 10.25%. Self-employed farmers and fishermen will see their payroll tax rate move from 1.75% to 0, eliminating their employer payroll tax liability completely. Education, sport, and scientific institutions This is some of our community clubs, Mr. Speaker, will see their payroll tax rate move from 1.75% to 1%, reducing their payroll tax liability by 43%. Qualifying retail businesses will see their payroll tax rate move from 7% to 6%, reduction of payroll tax liability of 14%, and hotel and restaurants with an annual payroll of $350,000 or more will see their payroll tax rate move from 6% to 5%, reducing their tax liability by 17%, Mr. Speaker. Yes, this government will support the businesses of this country. Moving on to employee payroll taxes. Mr. Speaker, Bermuda's system for employee payroll taxes is regrettably complex. One of the hallmarks of a good system of taxation is that it is simple to understand. Unfortunately, the current structure of our employee payroll tax is anything but simple. Although the government desires to simplify this tax system in the future, while we are in the midst of a review of our tax policies due to the required implementation of the OECD Global Minimum Tax, that necessarily simplification will not be delivered this year. Mr. Speaker, there has been much conversation regarding the government's proposals to make our employee payroll taxes more progressive. It is important that honorable members recall that employee payroll taxes are not the liability of employers under the law. Changes made to the payroll tax system in 2016 created two separate and distinct entities responsible for the burden of payroll tax: the employer and the employee. I am cognizant that some businesses in the country may choose to cover their employees' payroll tax obligations. However, Mr. Speaker, that choice cannot be used as an argument against ensuring that we have a more progressive system of taxation in Bermuda for income from labor. Mr. Speaker, based upon the feedback that the Ministry of Finance has received and following conversations with cabinet colleagues, the following payroll tax system will be in place for employee payroll taxes for the tax period commencing April 2023. Mr. Speaker, to ensure that increases in higher brackets of taxation are not as dramatic as proposed. In the pre-budget report, the government of Bermuda has elected to introduce a fifth marginal tax bracket, whereas previously there were 4 different tax bands. There will now be 5. Again, Mr. Speaker, I understand the complexity of this tax system and the difficulty that it placed on employers to calculate the rates of taxation for their employees correctly. And I want business owners to know that the government recognizes how challenging that is. One of the aims and objectives for the review of the tax system following the recommendations of the International Tax Working Groups on Bermuda's implementation of the global minimum tax will look how to simplify this marginal tax rate system. Mr. Speaker, as I stated earlier, the headline of the payroll tax reform for employees is that any employee making less than $132,000 a year will pay less payroll tax this year than they did last year. And as I've said it, Mr. Speaker, this amount captures 86% of Bermuda's workforce, which means that today, this PLP government is delivering a tax cut for 86% of the workers in this country. Now to the details, Mr. Speaker. As I've just stated, prior to this year, there were 4 marginal tax brackets. However, come the tax period that ends on June 2023, there'll be 5. The new tax brackets will be charged at the following marginal rates. For the first $48,000 of income, the employee tax rate will be 0.5%. For the next $48,000 of income, the employee payroll tax rate will be 9.25%. For the third marginal tax band, income earned between $96,000 and $200,000, the employee tax rate will be 10%. For the fourth marginal tax band, income between $200,000 and $500,000, the employee tax rate will be 11.5%. And for the fifth marginal tax band, income earned between $500,000 and $1 million, as we increase the cap to $1 million, the employee tax rate will be 12.5%. Mr. Speaker, it is essential for all persons to recall that these are marginal rates, meaning that persons will pay the same rate for income in a band. So someone making $250,000 will pay 0.5 on their first $48,000 of income, just as someone making only $48,000. Alternatively, someone making $96,000 does not pay 9.25% on all of their income. They pay 0.5 on the first $48,000 and 9.25 on the amount between $48,000 and $96,000. With these revised marginal rates, the highest effective employee tax rate will now increase from 9% in the current fiscal year to 11.2% in the next fiscal year. And the total amount to be estimated to be collected in fiscal year 2023-24 from employer and employee payroll tax is $504.5 million. Mr. Speaker, before this government was reelected in 2017, workers making $48,000 a year were paying $2,280 a year in payroll taxes. Since then, this government has steadily reduced the tax burden on Bermuda's workers, and we have continued to do so in this budget. Next year, Mr. Speaker, that same worker will pay $240 in payroll tax, a reduction of $2,040. Mr. Speaker, this means that since this government was elected, workers earning $48,000 have paid nearly $7,000 less in payroll taxes. And the average worker in this country, based on the median income, Mr. Speaker, would have paid $4,500 less under this government. That means more money in their pockets to spend things that they and their families need. Mr. Speaker, to summarize the payroll tax changes, there are no employer tax increases for any business in Bermuda. Every local business will see their payroll taxes decrease, and 86% of the workers of Bermuda will see their taxes decrease. More money in the pockets of workers and more relief for local business. That, Mr. Speaker, is how you deliver sustainable economic growth, and that is what this PLP government has delivered and will continue to deliver. Mr. Speaker, this government is proud of its record of expanding employee rights, and we are also proud that we extended paid maternity leave from 8 weeks to 13 weeks, and paid paternity leave from none that existed to 5 days. However, during maternity and paternity leave, employers are subject to pay payroll tax for their employees who are not currently working their business. Therefore, the government will exempt employers from paying payroll tax on the salaries paid to their employees while on maternity and paternity leave. Mr. Speaker, moving on to customs duty changes. Customs duty is the second largest revenue source for the government and is projected to generate $227 million in fiscal year 23-24. The government has approved the following changes to customs duty this year. There is additional relief that the government will deliver to local businesses. For many years, restaurants and retailers have had the benefit of customs duty exemptions for equipment used to upgrade their facilities. Investments in plants and equipment are vital for continued economic success. Restaurants that invest in more efficient equipment increase their productivity and therefore the health of their business, allowing them to continue to employ staff and serve customers. Mr. Speaker, these are not the only businesses that need to constantly invest in the upkeep of their equipment to ensure they can continue to remain viable. Therefore, as proposed in the pre-budget reports, the government will extend this customs duty exemption for investments in plant and equipment to the personal care service, but also, Mr. Speaker, not in the pre-budget report, to the personal fitness sectors as well. Spas, beauty salons, and fitness centers serve locals and visitors alike, and we must support them in providing new and updated equipment for the enjoyment of their customers without the burden of additional customs duty when they seek to upgrade their facilities. Customs duty charges for upgrades to equipment represent a disincentive for business owners to invest. Business investment is key for economic growth, and this change will make it easier for local business to invest in the future. As an additional item of relief for parents of school-aged children, the government will exempt all school uniforms imported to the country by local businesses for resale from customs duty. Moving on, you're welcome, Minister of Education. Moving on, revisions to the sugar tax. Mr. Speaker, the sugar tax is something that this government pledged to implement in its 2017 election manifesto and has kept its promise to do so. Mr. Speaker, we all know the background of the consumption of sugar and the long-term health impacts on our local population. Bermuda has one of the highest rates of non-communicable disease in the world, and it is incumbent upon governments to act to reduce these pressures over the long term. However, Mr. Speaker, the application of the sugar tax via the customs tariff has led to many items which may contain minimal added sugar being subject to the sugar tax. Therefore, we will table in this session changes to the Customs Tariff Act that will ensure that the sugar tax is focused on sodas and drinks with significant amounts of added sugar, my favorite thing, candy, and made primarily from sugar and chocolate. However, items that may have a small amount of additional sugar, such as nutritional bars, you're talking about protein shakes, protein bars, low sugar drinks with a little bit of added sugar, and non-dairy creamers will see their customs duty rates reduce. Mr. Speaker, Bermuda is running out of limestone aggregate. Typically, aggregate is not imported into Bermuda, but as the need is increasing, it is important that we act to minimize the increased construction costs. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, the government will eliminate customs duties on aggregate imports used to manufacture concrete and concrete blocks. Southampton Princess, approve residential schemes, maybe even expansion to your house, Cole. You know what I'm saying? It's for everyone, growth for everyone. Come on, Cole, come on. I know it's hard for you to support opposition leader, but this is what we must do. Mr. Speaker, thank you, Mr. Speaker, my apologies. Moving on to other revenue measures. This budget contains further changes to fees, charges, and taxes that will collect additional funds to meet the revenue target. Mr. Speaker, 2018 was the last time that the PLP government implemented the biennial fee review, which saw all government fees and charges increase by 5%. I am pleased to report that we will not be implementing an across-the-board increase in fees that would impact all government services such as vehicle licensing, passport renewals, annual business licenses, customs charges, and rental of government facilities. There will, however, Mr. Speaker, be adjustments to fees to support the government's necessary infrastructure investment, and the following fees will increase by 5%. Stamp duty, trademark fees, fines, solid waste dumping fees, immigration fees, with the exception of passports, planning fees, seaborne shipping fees. The increase in these fees are estimated to yield an additional $3.3 million for the government. Moving to land tax, Mr. Speaker, during consultation with various groups of industry, when suggesting alternative proposals to the government, it was pointed out that Bermuda's land taxes for high-value properties are comparatively low when compared to other jurisdictions. To provide additional revenue to the Treasury while not increase the burden on the vast majority of homeowners, the government will increase the top two bands of land tax by 5% each. This increase will only affect 4% of the top properties, those persons with ARVs of over $90,000, and is expected to yield an additional $2.4 million. Mr. Speaker, during the new fiscal year, the Registrar of Companies will introduce a new corporate regulatory fee. The fee, which is planned to be $100 annually for local companies and $500 annually for other entities, is expected to generate approximately $6 million. Historically, the primary responsibilities of the Registrar of Companies has been to effectively administer the registration and regulation of all corporate entities in Bermuda and ensure the provision of current and accurate registry information. But as the Registrar of Companies has assumed additional regulatory responsibility to overseeing the adherence of companies to changing global requirements, such as economic substance, it is necessary to ensure that these compliance costs are appropriately funded by the entities that they will now be regulating. Consultation with industry has been ongoing for the last 2 years, and the new regime will be effective in 2024. Mr. Speaker, vacation rentals are a part of our tourism matrix. However, it must be noted that the initial vacation rental program was introduced in 2018, when Bermuda's economy was still recovering and there were no limits placed on properties that were subject to rent control being converted into vacation rentals. In many jurisdictions globally, where vacation rentals have reduced the amount of affordable housing, governments must act to ensure that vacation rentals do not exacerbate housing shortages. Though the government is not proposing a limit on vacation rentals at this time, there will be a fee introduced to registered properties of vacation rentals, which we base on the ARV of the property, and this new fee is expected to generate $500,000 in revenue. Mr. Speaker, public access information regime is a proud achievement of the PLP government. To ensure that the public has access to information and the government keeps on them and is better able to understand the reasoning for government actions. Patty increased the government's transparency and accountability. Despite this, the regime can be cumbersome and expensive. As an example, Mr. Speaker, no exaggeration whatsoever, a single government authority spent in excess of $320,000 responding to a single Patty request. Wow. $320,000, Mr. Speaker. These are funds that could have been used to advance the well-being of Bermuda, but were instead spent on researching information. High levels of expenditure on requests are not uncommon, as many government departments have had to halt vital work or actually hire short-term consultants to assist in responding to Patty requests. That's what we have going on right now in the Ministry of Finance. We want to advance legislation, but here we are, making sure that we are fulfilling this. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, the government will implement a nominal fee for Patty requests that are not from private individuals requesting information about the data that the government holds about them. That nominal fee will not nearly cover the extraordinary amount that researching Patty requests costs the government, but the Cabinet has deemed it necessary to implement a fee to ensure that at least some of the costs of these requests are recouped. Mr. Speaker, an assessment has been completed comparing Bermuda's court fees to those in other jurisdictions, and Bermuda's fees were found to be considerably lower than competitor jurisdictions. As Bermuda's international business sector has developed and grown, the number and complexity of court matters have increased significantly. A new scale of fees which will impact matters being conducted in the Magistrates Court, Supreme Court, and Court of Appeal has been developed. It is anticipated that these changes will yield an additional $750,000. Now, Mr. Speaker, let's talk about a balanced budget if we can. Last year in this Honorable House, I stated that the government would reach a balanced budget by fiscal year 2024-2025. And I'm proud to share with honorable members and the public that we are still on the path to achieving that goal. However, it is vital that I provide some context, Mr. Speaker, as I know that there will be some who will comment that the government should use the additional revenue to balance the budget this year. And yes, it is true that we could have achieved a balanced budget on paper this year, but to do so would not have been an economically wise choice. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Finance could have held ministers to the $75 million capital expenditure target set last year, which would have resulted in a continued deterioration of Bermuda's infrastructure and further delay to critical projects. The Ministry of Finance could have held to last year's current expenditure target, rather than increasing current expenditure to ensure that we deliver on key initiatives in the government's platform and Bermuda's economic recovery plan to improve the lives of residents. The Ministry of Finance could have chosen not to reduce taxes on persons making less than $132,000 a year and chosen not to reduce tax on local business while working families and local business struggle with the highest global inflation in 40 years. Yes, Mr. Speaker, in theory, I could be presenting a balanced budget on behalf of this government today. But if we had made that choice, there would be more badly paved roads in Bermuda. Our hospital would likely default on its government guarantee debt. Critical infrastructure would go unfixed. The government would not be able to build more desperately needed affordable housing. The airport would be at risk of being shut down to the inability to fund firefighters necessary to keep it open. Tynes Bay Waste Energy Facility could fail, and we could go back to landfilling in the Pembroke Marsh. And in addition, we would not have the resources to be able to advance vital projects such as education reform and universal health care. Mr. Speaker, these are the choices you face in government. And rather than presenting budgets to please armchair critics or naysayers, we are determined to ensure that the people of this country know that they have a government that is committed to delivering for them. Bermudians want to know that the government can balance the difficult choices to ensure that we execute our election promises in a fiscally responsible and prudent manner. And Mr. Speaker, today's budget demonstrates our ability to do just that. Mr. Speaker, with the path for growth that has been laid out in this budget, with the investments that we are making to ensure that our infrastructure can be solid, with the investments we are making to advance critical issues like universal health care and education reform, which are so vital to our island's future, and with the investments that we're making in affordable housing, parish primary school conversion, and healthcare facilities throughout the island, all while improving government efficiency, we will meet the target set last year to have a fully balanced budget in fiscal year 2024-25. With a balanced budget and sustained economic growth, this government will be in a position to start reducing its public debt. Speaking about debt reduction, Mr. Speaker, debt reduction will start this year. When the government repays a $50 million bond from the balance in the sinking fund, which will see interest payments decline by $2.4 million next year. Mr. Speaker, monies owed, Mr. Speaker, I hear a lot of chirping from the opposition. They seem to forget that a lot of that debt is that we're having to deal with is racked up under them when they doubled it, and I have to deal with Morgan's Point. Understand, Mr. Speaker, that's what we got, but it's okay. We will have a debate next week. Don't worry. We will have a debate next week. Mr. Speaker, monies owed to the government but not paid to reduce the government's revenue cause an unfair tax burden on the rest of the community. Therefore, as part of his path towards a balanced budget, this government will make a more concerted effort towards tax collection through enhanced enforcement of policies and processes. It will also continue infrastructure investment within the Office of Tax Administrator to better equip its staff in their debt collection efforts. Mr. Speaker, it should be noted, however, that when the outstanding balance recorded at the end of the fiscal year is high, it includes taxes to be paid at the beginning of the next quarter, which represents approximately $35 million of the annual tax revenue. Therefore, the $314 million in Office of Tax Commissioner receivables balance recorded in the financial statements that I tabled today includes payroll taxes of more than $130 million, which were actually paid a month later. This is required by accounting standards, but it overstates the amount that is subject to active debt collection efforts. Mr. Speaker, that much being said, there is still a significant amount of funds owed to the government, and we intend to take further action with legislation that will place further restrictions on businesses, individuals, and landowners who are not current with their tax obligations or current on their tax payment plans. These restrictions can include the denial of contracts, grants, permits, licenses, passports, or other government authorizations. Mr. Speaker, the Office of the Tax Commissioner will also work more closely with the Department of Public Prosecutions to the courts, create a pathway for efficient adjudication of claims, including designated days for each month for the court to consider cases for recovery of outstanding taxes. It's important to note, Mr. Speaker, this option will be reserved only for taxpayers who have the means to pay, but refuse to communicate and or work with the Office of the Tax Commissioner. Mr. Speaker, the Office of the Tax Commissioner is committed to working with taxpayers to establish payment plans and to decrease penalties for those willing to adhere to payment arrangements as agreed. Penalties and interest often form a sizable amount of outstanding tax debt and can discourage taxpayers from attempting to pay off amounts earned. The Office of the Tax Commissioner has begun implementing a new debt management system that aims to improve its processes and procedures, ensure consistent collection activities, and train staff on best debt collection practices. Their system will also be used to enable data-driven decisions and practices that will result in more efficient and effective collection of tax arrears. Mr. Speaker, the government has set a target of recovering $7.5 million of past due taxes during this fiscal year, which is reflected in the payroll tax projections. Mr. Speaker, there is no need to belabor the profoundly negative impact the COVID-19 pandemic has had on Bermuda and our local business. As previously stated, the government introduced a number of measures to provide short-term support to those businesses, including temporary tax concessions. It must be emphasized that those concessions were always intended to be temporary, as there is a strong likelihood of distorting the economy while reducing efficiency and productivity if they were to remain in place for extended periods of time. Mr. Speaker, as we continue to move this country beyond the pandemic, the government will no longer be extending these payroll tax concessions, and businesses will be expected to recommence their payroll tax payments. It is important that these businesses do not build these concessions into their business models and make the necessary adjustments required to thrive in this evolving economy. Additionally, in many cases, Mr. Speaker, these concessions were issued across industry sectors, and it is recognized that some companies receive the subsidy despite it not being needed. Mr. Speaker, just as pandemic tax concessions are set to come to an end, the payroll tax relief for new hires is set to expire in March of 2024. This program, introduced in 2018, the first budget statement that I gave in this Honorable House, has been remarkably successful, and currently there are about $350 million of tax remuneration that is not subject to employer payroll tax due to this exemption. That means that since this exemption was created, there are $350 million being paid to employees of mostly international business where their business is not responsible for the employee portion of payroll tax. If this concession comes to an end next year, and if current employer payroll taxes stay where they are, the government can expect a minimum of $30 million of additional payroll tax revenue. Mr. Speaker, though it is unlikely that this successful relief, which has boosted employment numbers, will come to an abrupt end, it must be modified, as it cannot be fair for exempted companies that started in 2018 to not pay any employer taxes after 2024, while our long-standing exempted companies continue to pay taxes on employees hired before 2018. Given the size of the remuneration that is subject to this relief, it is likely that the government will be able to further reduce employer rates in all payroll categories, including exempted companies, in next year's budget. Mr. Speaker, the additional revenue from payroll tax that can be expected from the revisions to the new hire relief, combined with a new hotel project to come online in 2024, and continued expansion of our economy supported by the growth measures contained in this budget, it is expected that revenue will increase by 4.7% in fiscal year 24-25 to hit the revenue target required to balance Bermuda's budget. Mr. Speaker, the government reform plan sets the direction for how public service as a collective will support a future forward government for the people of Bermuda. The reform plan for the period of 2019 to 2023 focused on foundational public administration initiatives and the People of Technology programs components of the program. Capacity and capability were strengthened in the people component, and the technology component focused on digitization. Mr. Speaker, in 2022-23, ministries facilitated a public value assessment of their services. The data was considered, and specific services have been identified for alternative service delivery. In 2023-24, ministries will work with internal and external consulting resources to complete reviews, establish the cost savings associated with alternative methods of delivery, and, subject to consultation of requisite approvals, implement wide-ranging service delivery changes across the government. The alternatives could include mergers, public-private partnerships, and potentially the cessation of certain services. Mr. Speaker, we have heard a lot from the opposition, who, as I said earlier in this speech, repeats baseless falsehoods in an attempt to score cheap political points. One of the favorite punching bags of the opposition is Bermuda's hard-working and dedicated public service, which members of the opposition repeatedly state is overstated, and they accuse the government of expanding the size of the public service. Mr. Speaker, once again, the opposition is completely misleading the public. As I've said in this Honorable House time and time again, there are fewer persons on government's payroll today than there were when we took office in 2017. I repeat, fewer employees today than when this PLP government took office 67 months ago. In fact, Mr. Speaker, if you look at the employee numbers for 2022, you will see the number of jobs in public administration fell again. This is not just what I'm saying, Mr. Speaker. It is what the data shows. Mr. Speaker, in July 2017, the total number of persons employed by the government stood at 4,661. At the end of December 2022, that number stood at 4,483, a reduction of 178 positions, or 3.8%. Yes, Mr. Speaker, that narrative, we had quite a few during COVID, yes we did. Mr. Speaker, that narrative being pushed by some, that this government has increased the size of the public service, is blatantly untrue. The data shows the exact opposite and demonstrates yet again that this government is managing public finances of Bermuda prudently. However, Mr. Speaker, you will note that there is an increase in funding for positions in this year's budget. That's for sure. Mr. Speaker, we must stop using the public service as a punching bag. No, it is not perfect, but most public officers go above and beyond to provide services to the public. And as the data I shared shows, public officers are delivering with fewer people, often doing double duty to ensure that vital government services continue to be provided. However, Mr. Speaker, this is not sustainable. Pay scales in the public sector have fallen behind private sector counterparts, and the government struggles to retain its best employees who can receive more lucrative opportunities elsewhere. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, this budget funds a review of specialist roles in the public service, allowing pay scales to be adjusted commensurate with expertise to ensure that the government can attract and retain experienced talent in areas such as legal, engineering, compliance, information technology, and finance. This review is vital and will save money in the long term, as specialized roles that cannot be filled currently require the use of external consultants, which costs the public purse more, Mr. Speaker. In my final section, pension reform. Mr. Speaker, the gap in funding of Bermuda's pension liabilities for the Contributory Pension Fund and the Public Service Superannuation Fund has been highlighted as a key issue by both the government and its advisors. Recent projections have estimated that unless the issue is addressed on a timely basis, the pension funds will not be able to pay future generations of pensioners. This has primarily resulted from the reality that Bermuda's population is aging, our workforce is not as large as it needs to be, and the amount of benefits paid is not matched by the level of contributions. This is why it is vital to not only grow the working population, Mr. Speaker, but also to enact reforms. The government has been working with the Public Funds Investment Committee and an international consulting firm with expertise in this area to update the framework for Bermuda's pension system. In particular, it has been determined that Bermuda should be consistent with most major financial centers that have individual social insurance contributions based on a percentage of income and not a fixed amount. In addition, the consultants assess the other key levers to reform a pension system, namely retirement age and benefits, to ensure the pension system is sustainable into the future. The proposed changes, coupled with the significant work being done to build the working population, will be critical for ensuring Bermuda stems the tide of continually increasing deficits in the funds, which are so critical for future retirees. Mr. Speaker, these changes are vital and they are overdue. And I look forward to finalizing the consultation with trade union and business representatives to enact these necessary changes. However, it is important to note that the intent of these changes is not to put a further burden on employers. Sudden changes to our social insurance system could see marked changes in company budgets and could be detrimental to business health and local employment. It is expected that while there may be some adjustments to employer contributions to social insurance, the contributions as a percentage of income will apply to employees. As we've seen in this budget, the government is intent on reducing taxes for employers so they can power additional job creation. However, Mr. Speaker, before I close, I would like to let all of Bermuda's pensioners know that this government will keep its promise and we will increase social insurance benefits by the rate of inflation this year. Mr. Speaker, I began this statement with a reference to the politics of hope. The trials of this present age dominate our thoughts, and to some extent, the development of our public policies. In such an age, it is easy for governments to be influenced by the most topical issues and fall into a reactive cycle that relegates vision and optimism to the backseat. But now, more than ever, governments must not just take the easy path. It is the government's responsibility to do the hard work of both overcoming present challenges while also laying the foundations for a better future. The hope of the people we serve transcends age, race, gender, religion, and sexual orientation. There is a collective desire to realize the best for Bermuda, and a common theme emerges from social media encounters, constituency clinics and canvassing, and even protests on the Cabinet Office lawn. People want this island to thrive. They want to witness growth and prosperity. People want Bermuda to innovate and open up. People want our education system to educate our children to the highest standard, equipping them for the jobs that drive this economy. People want to enjoy life and see their children and grandchildren doing so well. Mr. Speaker, almost 25 years ago, the people of Bermuda embraced the politics of hope and for the first time elected a progressive Labor Party government. Those of us who toil day after day in the field of elective politics do so based on the trust that is represented by each and every vote that we received. And having offered ourselves for public service, we understand the covenant into which we have entered with the people of Bermuda. Mr. Speaker, 25 years on, that hope is undimmed. The vision is as clear as ever, and no pandemic, no global inflation, no foreign war can come between this progressive Labor Party government and the sacred trust of delivering on the mandate of hope granted to us by the people of Bermuda. Mr. Speaker, I am immensely proud to commend to this honorable House a budget that will stay true to that mantra of hope, set out in those early days of Dame Lois Brown Evans, L. Frederick Wade, Eugene Cox, David Allen, and of Arthur Hodson. Nelson Bascom and Walton Brown, and so many others who dedicated their life to service and the pursuit of that fairer and better Bermuda that we continue to build. Mr. Speaker, as an heir to those giants of hope, humbled and yet immensely gratified to commend to this honorable House the estimates of revenue and expenditure for fiscal year 2023-24. I do so with the greatest conviction that this budget represents another step towards the even better and fairer Bermuda that we all wish to build and our path towards continued economic growth. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.